The tragic loss. The stars twinkled in the vast, dark expanse of space as the small human settlement on the distant planet of Zarkon awaited its usual day-to-day routine. Life was simple for the humans who lived there, small, isolated, yet peaceful. But no one could have anticipated that this morning would be different. No one could have predicted that this would be the day that changed everything. It all started when the Galactic Empire, in their arrogance and thirst for control, decided to conduct a raid on Zarkon. To the Empire, this planet was nothing but a small dot in the galaxy, insignificant, irrelevant. They didn't care about the lives of those who lived there. To them, the humans were no more than pests to be crushed. The Empire had vast weapons, ships that could tear entire cities apart, and soldiers with the power to wipe out any resistance. They came, not expecting any challenge. But that was their first mistake. As the Empire's massive ships descended onto Zarkon's atmosphere, the humans, though unprepared, fought back with every ounce of their strength. They weren't soldiers. They were farmers, teachers, children, and parents, defending their homes, their families, their way of life. The humans fought with heart, but the Empire had weapons they could never dream of: laser cannons, plasma bombs, and the might of their war machines. Among the chaos, there was a small child, barely 6 years old, standing with his mother near the edge of a crumbled building. The child's wide eyes were filled with both fear and wonder as the ships loomed above. His mother, trembling, held his hand tightly, trying to shield him from the destruction that was happening all around them. "Stay close," she whispered to him, her voice quivering with fear. But the child was curious, his innocent mind unable to comprehend the horror that was unfolding before him. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, wanting to see more. His tiny hand reached toward the wreckage, his gaze locked on the Empire's ships, massive and unstoppable in the sky. "What's that, Mommy?" he asked, pointing upwards. Before his mother could answer, the ground beneath them shook violently. The roar of the Empire's ships grew louder, and then everything went silent. The blast came without warning. A powerful, deafening explosion sent a shockwave through the streets, and the child was thrown off his feet, landing on the ground with a harsh thud. His mother screamed in agony, reaching out for him as the world around them fell apart. But she was too late. The child's body lay still, unmoving, a tragic casualty in the Empire's ruthless attack. The human survivors watched in shock and disbelief as the young child's life was taken in an instant. His mother, clutching her son's lifeless body, was left in a world that had grown darker and more dangerous. She cried out, her voice lost in the noise of destruction. For the first time, it became painfully clear to the humans that the Galactic Empire would stop at nothing. No one was safe, not even the most innocent. But amidst the grief and despair, something else stirred within the hearts of the survivors. A fire, a desire for justice, began to burn. This wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration of war. The humans could no longer stand idly by and wait for the Empire to come and destroy them one by one. They had to fight back. In the aftermath of the attack, a lone human survivor stood amidst the ruins. His eyes were hard with grief, but there was something else, something more dangerous, stirring deep within him. The humans had been pushed to their limits, and this tragedy would not go unanswered. The message he sent out that day was simple but powerful. "We warned you. Now, run before it's too late." The words echoed through the stars, reaching beyond Zarkon, beyond the galaxy, straight to the heart of the Galactic Empire. But would they listen? Would the Empire hear the warning, or would they continue their path of destruction, unaware of the consequences that were coming? The death of the child was only the beginning. The human race had been tested, and they were ready for what was to come. The Galactic Empire had no idea what they had unleashed. The rising fury. The morning after the attack, the quiet streets of Zarkon were transformed into a battlefield. The once peaceful town was now a pile of rubble, and the few surviving humans were mourning the loss of their loved ones. But even in the midst of this overwhelming sorrow, There was a fierce determination growing in their hearts. Among the survivors, there was a man named Eric. He had been a farmer, a simple man with a simple life, before the Empire's ruthless assault. His house, his crops, his entire life had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. But the loss of his family, of his people, was the spark that ignited something far more powerful within him, a fury that was both overwhelming and dangerous. The Empire had taken too much. The death of the child was the final straw. Eric stood in the middle of the ruins, his eyes filled with pain and rage. He clutched a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe that had once been part of a nearby building. His hand shook not from fear, but from the raw, uncontained fury that coursed through him. The destruction, the helplessness, the senseless death, it all built up inside him until it could no longer be contained. He wasn't the only one. All around him, others were waking up to the realization that their world had changed forever. The Empire had made a grave mistake. It had pushed the humans to the edge. Now, there would be no turning back. The survivors gathered together, their voices low but filled with a growing resolve. They would fight back, not just to avenge the child, but to stop the Empire from doing this to anyone else. Enough is enough, Eric said, his voice shaking with anger. We can't just hide and hope they leave us alone. We fight. We fight for our homes, for our families, and for the future of our people. Others nodded, their faces hardening with the same determination. They knew they were outmatched in terms of technology, weaponry, and military strength, but they had something the Empire didn't: heart, grit, and a fierce desire to protect what was theirs. The Galactic Empire might have destroyed their homes, but they had awakened a force that would not be easily extinguished. The survivors, a diverse group of humans from all walks of life, began to organize. They worked quickly, scavenging the wreckage for anything that could be used as a weapon or a tool. Metal scraps, old machinery, anything they could turn into something useful for their cause. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but there was no turning back now. In the coming days, whispers began to spread across the galaxy. The humans of Zarkon were no longer a helpless people cowering under the Empire's boot. They were rising. They had a purpose, and they would not stop until the Empire had paid for what they had done. The message went out, reaching other human colonies scattered across the galaxy. There were rumors, stories of the tragedy on Zarkon, of the child's death, of the unrelenting fury that now burned in the hearts of the survivors. The Galactic Empire had made a mistake, a big one. Back on Zarkon, Eric and the others prepared. They built traps, made weapons, and gathered their strength. They knew they couldn't win this battle by brute force alone. The Empire had vast fleets, advanced technology, and overwhelming numbers. But they had something the Empire couldn't even begin to understand: the will to fight. And that, Eric knew, would make all the difference. The humans were not just fighting for revenge. They were fighting for their very existence. The Empire had thought they could wipe them out with a single attack. But what the Empire didn't know was that the humans were not as weak as they believed. They had been pushed to the brink. And now they were ready to show the galaxy just how wrong the Empire was. Eric stood at the front of the group, looking out over the horizon. The quiet stillness of the broken town surrounded him, but within him a storm was brewing. He could feel it. The fight was coming. And this time, the humans would be the ones calling the shots. They wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. We warned them, Eric muttered under his breath. Now they'll see what happens when you mess with humanity. And so, the stage was set. The survivors on Zarkon would rise up, and they would send a message to the Empire that would echo across the stars. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for everything they held dear, and they would stop at nothing to win. The unseen resistance. In the days that followed the destruction of Zarkon, the humans' resolve only grew stronger. The word of their resistance spread across the galaxy like wildfire, reaching far-off colonies and even distant space stations. Despite the Empire's overwhelming power, something about the humans' unyielding spirit was impossible to ignore. Eric and the others, now a makeshift army of survivors, had retreated into the hidden tunnels beneath the ruins of Zarkon. They were deep underground, away from the Empire's eyes, but the underground felt like home now. The tunnels were a network that had once been used by the locals for trade routes and escape tunnels in times of war. Now, they were the birthplace of a rebellion. Eric had never been a soldier. He had been a farmer, a man of the soil, with no real skills beyond growing crops and raising animals. But in the face of the Empire's brutality, he became something more. He became a leader, a symbol of human resistance. The fire in his eyes could not be extinguished, and his passion for defending the innocent inspired those around him. As Eric walked through the underground tunnels, he saw the determination on every face he passed. Every person was working tirelessly to prepare. Some were sharpening weapons, others were assembling explosives, and some were organizing medical supplies. They were building something bigger than a mere rebellion. They were building hope. "We're not just fighting for revenge," Eric said to one of his closest allies, a young woman named Mira. "We're fighting for our future. We have to show the Empire that they can't just come in and destroy us without consequences." Mira nodded, her face grim. "I know, but we have to be careful. The Empire is everywhere. If they catch us, we'll be wiped out in an instant." Eric didn't disagree. The Empire's vast fleets, advanced technology, and ruthless military were a constant threat. They had already shown their power by wiping out Zarkon's peaceful population. The humans knew they were up against overwhelming odds, but they also knew something the Empire didn't. They had nothing left to lose. The survivors had learned the ways of guerrilla warfare quickly. They understood the art of ambushes and traps. They had no hope of matching the Empire's strength head-on, but in the shadows, they could strike fear into the heart of their enemy. They were a thorn in the Empire's side, and every successful ambush was a victory. While Eric worked tirelessly to organize the resistance, others were spreading the message of their rebellion. The Empire's commanders and high-ranking officers were underestimating the humans' resolve. They believed that the humans would crumble, that the loss of their families, their homes, and their land would break them. But they were wrong. As the human resistance grew, so did their network. Secret communications and alliances were formed with other colonies that had suffered under the Empire's iron fist. The Empire's control was weakening, and they had no idea how close they were to a storm that would come from the most unexpected place. The very humans they thought were weak and helpless. Eric knew that they couldn't take on the Empire's fleets directly, but they could create chaos. They could sabotage supply lines, strike key Imperial targets, and force the Empire to spread their forces thin. The more they made the Empire chase ghosts, the more they bought themselves time to prepare for the bigger battle ahead. One night, as Eric stood outside the tunnels looking up at the stars, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The path ahead was dangerous, and the consequences of failure were unimaginable. Yet, for the first time since the attack, Eric felt something he hadn't felt before: hope. The humans weren't just survivors anymore. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. "We're not alone in this," Eric whispered to himself, his eyes scanning the sky. "And the Empire doesn't even know what's coming." His words were not just a promise to himself, but a declaration to the universe. The humans had been pushed to the brink, but now they were pushing back. As the resistance built strength, the Empire remained unaware of the storm that was gathering. But it would soon learn. In the dark corners of the galaxy, the humans were growing stronger, and they were prepared to show the Empire the full power of their defiance. The fight had only just begun, and Eric was more determined than ever to lead his people to victory, no matter the cost. The humans would not be silenced, and the Empire would soon learn that their greatest mistake was underestimating humanity's will to survive. The first strike. The morning of the first strike arrived quietly, almost eerily calm. The tunnels under Zarkon were alive with activity, but the surface, where the Empire's forces once patrolled in overwhelming numbers, was now still. The humans had prepared, trained, and planned. It was time to move. Eric stood at the head of the group, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him, but his mind was sharp. He was no longer just a farmer. He had become a strategist, a leader. And today, his people would make their first move against the Empire. They had received intelligence from a nearby colony, one that had been under Imperial occupation for years. The Empire's supply lines were vulnerable. A convoy carrying vital resources, including weapons and fuel for the Empire's warships, was scheduled to pass through an abandoned mining route in 2 hours. The humans would be ready. Everyone knows their positions, Eric said, his voice steady but low. Stay focused, strike fast, and don't give them a chance to retaliate. Mira, who had become one of Eric's most trusted lieutenants, gave him a nod. We're ready. Let's make this count. The group of 25 humans, armed with homemade weapons and improvised explosives, moved in silence through the hidden pathways. They had spent weeks preparing for this moment, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Their target was a convoy of heavily armored vehicles transporting supplies from the Empire's main base to one of their forward operating stations. The Empire, with all its technological might, had never expected a resistance from the humans. They had underestimated them in the worst way possible. As they approached the mining route, Eric's team spread out into position, concealing themselves behind large boulders and old mining equipment. The convoy would pass through a narrow stretch of road in a few minutes. It was a perfect choke point for an ambush. The humans had placed explosive charges on the road and rigged the area with traps. If all went according to plan, the convoy would never see it coming. Time seemed to stretch, each second feeling like an eternity as they waited for the convoy's arrival. The tension was unbearable, but the humans were determined. They had already lost so much. The death of innocent civilians, the destruction of their homes. This strike would be their way of showing the Empire that they would not bow down. A distant rumble interrupted their thoughts. It was faint at first, but it quickly grew louder. The convoy was coming. Eric's heart raced, but his hands remained steady as he signaled to his team. Positions, he whispered. The convoy appeared over the horizon. 3 heavily armored trucks, followed by 2 scout vehicles. They moved slowly, unaware of the trap waiting for them. Eric took a deep breath and gave the signal. The first explosion shook the ground beneath them. The charge Eric had set on the road went off with a deafening roar, sending debris and dust flying into the air. The convoy came to a sudden halt, and confusion spread among the soldiers inside. But before they could react, a second explosion erupted from the rear, cutting off their escape. Pandemonium followed. The humans had already moved in, swift and silent. They attacked with precision, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Mira led a small team to the rear of the convoy, disabling the scout vehicles and taking out several Imperial soldiers before they could even raise an alarm. Eric's team moved quickly, securing the trucks and neutralizing any remaining resistance. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. The humans moved with purpose, their actions swift and decisive. The Empire's soldiers were no match for their guerrilla tactics. Within minutes, the convoy was neutralized. The Empire's supplies were now in the hands of the resistance, and the humans had struck their first blow. But this was just the beginning. Eric stood at the center of the battlefield, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the convoy. The Imperial soldiers who had survived were either retreating or captured. The humans had won this fight, but the war was far from over. Eric could feel the weight of the moment. This victory, while important, was only a small piece of the larger puzzle. This is just the start, Eric muttered to himself as the team began gathering supplies and securing prisoners. We've sent a message today. The Empire isn't invincible, and we're not going to stop until they learn that. Mira approached him, her face smeared with dirt and sweat, but her eyes alight with triumph. "We did it, Eric. We hit them hard. They won't forget this." Eric gave a nod, though his expression remained serious. "They'll come for us. But now they'll know we can strike back. We've just started something bigger than any of us." As the humans loaded up their new supplies and prepared to return to the safety of the tunnels, they knew this victory would echo throughout the galaxy. The Empire would be forced to respond, but the humans were ready. The Resistance had taken its first step, and the fight for their future had just begun. The Empire strikes back. The news of the humans' attack spread like wildfire across the Empire. They had anticipated rebellion, of course, but this was something different. The humans had actually struck back. The Empire's command was furious, not just because of the lost supplies, but because of the humiliation of being outsmarted by a group they had deemed insignificant. The Galactic Empire, vast and ruthless, had always believed its strength lay in its overwhelming firepower. They had never considered that the humans, with their limited resources and under the Empire's heel for so long, might have the ingenuity and resolve to mount a real resistance. In the Empire's High Command Center, General Thrax stood before a large map of the galaxy, his face stern and unreadable. He had served in many campaigns, witnessed countless rebellions crushed beneath the might of the Empire. But this felt different. The humans had disrupted one of their most critical supply lines, and now the entire fleet was on high alert. This was no random act of defiance. It was a declaration of war. "They've crossed the line," Thrax growled, his voice cold. "Find them. Hunt them down. Leave nothing behind." His orders were clear. Destroy the Resistance before it could gain any momentum. The Empire would not allow such an affront to go unpunished. The humans had made their first move. Now the Empire would respond with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, Eric and his team were already deep in the mountains, far from the site of the ambush. They had taken the supplies and prisoners with them, knowing full well that the Empire would retaliate. The humans had expected this. It was always part of the plan. But even as they celebrated their victory, there was an underlying tension, a sense of unease. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Eric stood in front of a makeshift war room, a cave lit by flickering torches, studying the map of their new territory. It was a stark contrast to the Empire's polished strategies and immense resources, but it was theirs. "We need to prepare," Eric said to his commanders, his voice low but determined. "The Empire will come after us, and they'll be relentless. We've made a mark, but now we have to protect what we've taken. They'll strike back, and when they do, we need to be ready." The tension in the air was palpable as each commander nodded in agreement. The victory had given the humans hope, but it had also drawn the Empire's ire. The Resistance needed to fortify their position quickly. Eric's mind raced as he thought of the plans he had already set in motion, building alliances with nearby systems, gathering more intelligence, and securing resources. But there was only so much they could do in such a short time. Hours later, the Empire's retribution began. The first wave of Imperial forces arrived as expected, but what the humans didn't anticipate was the overwhelming scale of the attack. The Empire had mobilized a fleet of warships, landing troops and equipment all over the planet. The ground shook as the massive Empire-made war machines descended, their weapons primed for destruction. Eric's eyes narrowed as he watched the Empire's forces land from a high cliff overlooking the battlefield. He had no illusions about the scale of the fight that was about to take place. The Empire wasn't here just to win. They were here to make a statement. The humans had successfully hit the Empire once, but now they would face the full weight of its might. There would be no mercy, no second chances. The humans had drawn a line in the sand, and the Empire was ready to erase it. The human resistance had learned much from their first victory, and Eric wasn't about to waste the advantage they had gained. The plan had been set into motion long before the Empire could arrive, and every human was in position. "Let them come," Eric muttered under his breath, watching as the Empire's forces descended closer. "We'll show them that this war is far from over." The Empire's forces made their approach, heavily armored and well-equipped, but the humans weren't standing still. They had scattered throughout the terrain, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage. Every rock, every tree, every cave was a potential hiding spot for the resistance, and it was a resource the Empire underestimated. The first wave of Imperial soldiers landed in an open field where they thought they would have an easy time taking control. But they had misjudged the humans. Eric's team struck quickly and silently, sabotaging their landing zone, cutting off the Empire's escape routes, and setting traps. The first few moments were chaos. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the humans launched their surprise attacks. The Empire's soldiers, despite their advanced training, were caught off guard, and many were sent into disarray. But the Empire's retaliation was swift. The next wave was more organized. Elite forces from the Empire's special unit began to push forward, ruthless and calculated. The humans had struck first, but the Empire would make them pay for their audacity. Eric knew this would be the hardest battle yet. His people had fought with everything they had, but the odds were becoming overwhelming. The Empire was relentless, and now the humans would have to dig deep into their strength, their resolve, and their creativity to survive. The fight was just beginning, but for Eric and the Resistance, there was no turning back. They had made their stand, and they would continue to fight until the very end. As the Empire's forces advanced, Eric's voice rang out over the battlefield. "This is our home, and we won't let it fall without a fight." The Empire's wrath. The battle was escalating, each moment more intense than the last. The Empire, bruised but not broken, had brought in reinforcements. Their troops were elite, trained for one thing: to crush any form of resistance with overwhelming force. The humans had disrupted the Empire's plans once before, but this time, the Empire would make sure they wouldn't get away so easily. Eric could hear the thudding of heavy boots as the Imperial soldiers advanced. Their massive war machines rumbled as they rolled across the terrain, shaking the ground beneath the humans' feet. Yet, despite the Empire's sheer strength, Eric could feel the pulse of determination in his people. The humans had something that the Empire underestimated: unbreakable willpower. "You know what to do," Eric said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. His team was scattered, each person hidden in the rocky terrain, prepared to strike when the moment was right. They had already made their first move, and now it was time to press on. The Empire's wrath had been unleashed, but the humans had their own fire to wield. The Empire's advanced technologies might have seemed unbeatable, but the humans had something the Empire didn't: knowledge of their land. It was the one advantage they had, and they weren't about to let it go to waste. The humans had set traps, hidden weapons, and created elaborate defenses that the Empire hadn't anticipated. It wouldn't be easy, but they had no choice but to fight. The first clash came in the form of explosions. Eric's team had laid mines in the path of the Empire's elite soldiers, and they detonated with devastating force. The Imperial soldiers were thrown into chaos, some falling to the ground, others scrambling to regroup. The humans seized the opportunity, launching guerrilla-style attacks from the surrounding cliffs and dense forest. For every step the Empire took, the humans struck back twice as hard. But it wasn't just about brute force. It was about strategy. Eric's orders had been clear: make them pay for every inch of ground they took. And with each strike, the humans were sending a powerful message. They wouldn't be crushed so easily. But the Empire wasn't done yet. They'd regrouped quickly, and before long, they'd brought in their most dangerous weapon: the Thunder Crash, an enormous war machine capable of leveling entire cities with its devastating firepower. It moved slowly but relentlessly, its massive cannons ready to fire. "Move out," Eric shouted as the massive war machine neared. His people scrambled into action, knowing that this machine was a game-changer. The Thunder Crash wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of the Empire's power. And if the humans didn't find a way to neutralize it, the tide of the battle would turn in the Empire's favor. Eric's mind raced as he quickly formulated a plan. He knew they couldn't fight the Thunder Crash head-on, not in a direct confrontation. They would need to outsmart it, just as they had done with the Empire's other weapons. But the Thunder Crash was a formidable foe, and every second counted. The humans quickly set up more traps, positioning themselves just out of sight. Eric's eyes narrowed as he saw the massive machine getting closer. He knew that one wrong move could be the end of it all. And then, the plan was set into motion. The first wave of soldiers distracted the Empire's forces, drawing their attention away from the Thunder Crash. As the machine lumbered closer, the humans set off the second wave of explosives, aimed directly at the Thunder Crash's weak points. The blast was massive, shaking the ground around them and sending a cloud of smoke into the air. For a moment, the world went silent. Then, the Empire's war machine faltered. Smoke and debris billowed from its massive structure, and for a few precious seconds, the humans had the advantage. The Thunder Crash had been damaged, its systems compromised, and it was no longer the threat it once was. But the Empire wasn't going to let this setback stop them. From the ruins of the war machine, the Imperial command units began to regroup, calling in reinforcements and bringing in even more devastating weapons. The humans had made a small dent, but the fight was far from over. "We've only just begun," Eric muttered to himself, watching the smoke clear. The humans had achieved a victory, but it wasn't enough. There was still a long road ahead, and the Empire wasn't going to back down. But the humans had made a promise to themselves and to their fallen comrades. They would not let the Empire walk over them. They had taken down one of the most advanced war machines the Empire had, and that victory would fuel their fight. Eric's voice rang out across the battlefield once again, his words carrying through the ranks of his people. "Keep fighting. We've shown them that we're not afraid. Now let's show them that we're unstoppable." The humans might have been outnumbered and outgunned, but they had one thing the Empire would never understand: the will to fight for what was right. And that made all the difference. The battle was far from over, but Eric knew one thing for sure: the Empire had underestimated them. And now, they would pay the price. The final stand. The battle had raged on for hours. The ground beneath them trembled with the force of explosions, and the sky was filled with the roar of gunfire and the whir of advanced alien technology. The Empire had sent their finest soldiers, their deadliest machines, and yet, despite all of this, the humans held firm. Eric stood at the front, his eyes scanning the battlefield, calculating every movement. The Empire had thrown everything they had at them. The Thunder Crash had been only one part of their arsenal, and now, the humans were facing their final challenge: the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Vortex Destroyer. It was said to have the power to wipe out entire planets with a single shot. But Eric had never been one to give up. He knew that as long as the humans stood together, they could defy the odds. And as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would not allow the Empire to destroy his people. "Get to the perimeter," Eric shouted to his team. "We can't let them deploy the Vortex Destroyer." His voice carried across the ranks of humans, and the soldiers scrambled into position, preparing for the final battle. Their traps had slowed the Empire down, but this was no time for subtlety. This was a battle for survival. The Empire's weapon loomed in the distance. It was a massive structure, a towering colossus of metal and energy, surrounded by a group of elite soldiers. The humans had one shot at this. There would be no second chances. The humans' movements were swift and coordinated as they rushed toward the Vortex Destroyer. Eric's heart pounded in his chest. He could hear the Empire's soldiers shouting orders, the unmistakable sound of their forces mobilizing. It was now or never. "Do not falter." Eric's voice rang out like a beacon, rallying the troops. "This is our fight. We fight for our future, for our children, for our homes. This is not their victory to claim." The humans surged forward, moving with purpose, as they darted through the rocky landscape, using every advantage they could find. Eric led them, his mind working in overdrive, calculating each step, each strike. They had one chance to take down the Vortex destroyer before it could fire. As they approached, the Empire's soldiers saw them coming and opened fire. The air crackled with energy beams, but the humans didn't slow down. They had been through this before, and they had learned to adapt, to fight smarter, not harder. Eric took a deep breath and signaled the attack. The ground shook as the humans launched their final offensive, using every last weapon, every last trap they had. Explosions rocked the Empire's defenses, and their machines began to falter, their systems overloaded from the barrage. It was then that Eric saw his opening. The Vortex destroyer's weak point was exposed, a small but crucial opening in its heavily armored core. He had to act fast. With a fierce determination, Eric sprinted forward, his team close behind him. The Empire's soldiers tried to stop them, but the humans pushed through, using everything at their disposal. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the weapon. And then, Eric was there. With a roar, he threw himself at the exposed core of the Vortex destroyer, his weapon in hand. His team followed, launching their own final attack, as the Empire's forces scrambled to stop them. Eric's heart raced as he thrust his weapon into the core, a blinding explosion erupting as the machine began to crumble. The Vortex destroyer was no more. But victory came at a cost. The final push had taken everything the humans had. Their forces were decimated, and many of their bravest soldiers had fallen. Yet, despite the carnage, Eric stood tall, his resolve unbroken. The Empire had been defeated. The humans had done it. The Empire's forces retreated, their once imposing army broken and in disarray. The battlefield was silent, save for the hum of the wind. The humans had emerged victorious, not because of their superior technology, but because they had fought with everything they had. Eric looked around at the faces of his people. They were battered, bruised, and weary, but they were alive. And that was more than the Empire had ever expected. "Today, we've shown them who we are," Eric said, his voice filled with pride. "We've shown the universe that no matter how strong they are, we will always rise. Humanity will never be conquered." The humans had taken down the Empire's greatest weapon, and in doing so, they had proven that the strength of their spirit was unmatched. The Empire had learned the hard way that no force in the galaxy could stand against the unyielding will of humanity. And as Eric gazed out across the battlefield, he knew that this victory was just the beginning. The galaxy would soon learn to fear the humans, not for their weapons, but for their determination, their courage, and their unshakable will to fight for what was right. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning, and the humans were ready. The final battle and humanity's triumph. The war had seemed endless. For years, Earth had fought a losing battle against the alien invaders. Cities had crumbled, entire nations were on the brink of collapse, and millions of lives were lost. Yet, against all odds, humanity stood resilient. In the final days of the war, as Earth's defenses were stretched thin, something miraculous happened. In a move no one saw coming, humanity's last-ditch plan succeeded. The final battle took place over a shattered landscape, where remnants of ruined cities dotted the horizon. Earth's military forces, including soldiers, pilots, and engineers, launched a surprise attack on the alien motherships, which had been hovering ominously above Earth's skies. Aboard the command ship, Commander David Hayes, a grizzled war veteran with a deep sense of duty, led the final strike. The mission was simple but dangerous: destroy the alien command center and cripple their forces for good. The stakes were higher than ever. Hayes stared out from the command deck of his ship, the horizon, watching as the battle raged on outside. It was a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Alien ships burning in the atmosphere, their enormous engines exploding one after another. For the first time in years, it looked like humanity had a chance, but the victory wasn't without a cost. "Commander, we've breached the alien fleet's defenses. We've got them. One of the crew members shouted in excitement. But Hayes didn't feel relief. Instead, he felt the weight of every life lost in this war. The people who wouldn't see the end of it. The ones who wouldn't be there to celebrate victory. The final blow came when Earth's most powerful weapon, an experimental energy cannon, fired its last shot, sending a beam of energy directly into the heart of the alien mothership. It exploded in a fiery blast, sending shockwaves that shook the entire planet. The alien forces, already battered and broken, scattered in retreat. The war was over. The remaining human forces cheered, but Hayes couldn't bring himself to join them. He stood silently, looking at the sky where the once invincible alien ships now burned in the atmosphere. A mixture of triumph and sadness filled his heart. They had won, yes, but at what cost? Days later, the celebrations began. Humanity's leaders, military generals, and civilians gathered in major cities across the globe. The streets were filled with people, waving flags and chanting in victory. But Hayes, like many others, felt a strange unease gnawing at him. What had they truly won? He had seen firsthand the destruction the war had caused. Cities that once stood as symbols of human achievement were now piles of rubble. Entire countries were left in ruins. The psychological toll on humanity was immense. The true war had just begun, rebuilding the world, restoring peace, and coming to terms with the horrors they had witnessed. As Hayes made his way to the War Memorial in New York City, he couldn't help but think of the families that would never see their loved ones again. The streets were filled with people, but the faces of many were somber, as if they were carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Then, a voice broke through his thoughts. "Commander Hayes," a young soldier called out, waving him over. Hayes turned to see a young man, no older than 20, standing with a group of soldiers. "We did it, sir. We actually won. We saved Earth." The soldier's face was lit with the kind of excitement that only youth could bring. Hayes gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, we did," Hayes replied quietly. "But sometimes victories come with more than just celebration." The soldier looked confused for a moment, but before he could ask, Hayes turned and walked away. There was a strange feeling in the air, something he couldn't shake. It was as though Earth's victory wasn't the end of the story, but just the beginning. As Hayes walked deeper into the memorial, he paused. In the center of the plaza, a large screen had been set up, displaying news footage from across the world. People were celebrating, but the images on the screen made him uneasy. The cameras zoomed in on areas of Earth that had been untouched by the war. It was there, amidst the untouched forests and mountains, that something strange had been discovered. A team of explorers, sent to investigate a remote region in the Arctic, had reported finding something extraordinary. They had unearthed a massive metallic structure buried deep beneath the ice. The structure was old, older than anything humans had ever built or known. It didn't appear to be of alien origin, nor did it belong to humanity. Commander Hayes stood frozen in place, his heart racing. He knew, deep down, that this discovery would change everything. The war had been over, but now Earth's greatest mystery was just beginning to unfold. And whatever it was far bigger than anything they had faced before. He turned away from the screen, his mind spinning. It was time to prepare for the next phase of humanity's future. What they had uncovered beneath the ice was not just a relic, it was a warning. And whatever lay ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. The war was over, but Earth's true battle was just beginning. Uncovering the ancient artifact. The celebrations after the war had been short-lived. As the world celebrated its hard-earned victory, Commander David Hayes couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was wrong. He had known it from the moment the news reached him. Something had been found beneath the ice. The report from the Arctic expedition team had described it as an enormous metallic structure, one that seemed too perfect to be natural, too advanced to belong to any known civilization. And it wasn't of alien origin either. Hayes, unable to ignore the growing sense of unease, immediately ordered a team to investigate. The discovery was in a remote part of the Arctic Circle, a place where few humans had ever ventured. As he stood at the edge of the icy landscape, the cold air biting at his skin, he couldn't help but wonder, why here? Why now? He looked at the team gathered around, a mix of military officers and scientists, each just as puzzled as he was. Their goal was clear: find out what the structure was, where it came from, and what purpose it served. The area had been carefully sealed off by the military, but the expedition team had already made their way to the site. As Hayes arrived at the excavation point, he saw them, standing near the massive, buried structure. The ice had been cleared, revealing an enormous metal door embedded into the earth. It was like nothing they had ever seen, smooth, perfectly crafted, and gleaming beneath the pale light of the Arctic sky. It's not possible," muttered Dr. Evelyn Carter, one of the leading archaeologists, as she stepped forward. She was the one who had initially analyzed the structure, and her expertise was vital to understanding what they had found. The door, which appeared to be centuries, or even millennia, old, showed no signs of wear. It was as if it had been perfectly preserved beneath the ice, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Hayes stepped closer, his boots crunching in the snow. He felt a strange pull, as if the structure was calling to him. He had been through countless battles, seen the worst the war had to offer, but nothing had prepared him for this. This wasn't a relic of a past war. This was something much older, and potentially more dangerous. "Have you been able to open it?" Hayes asked, his voice low. Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "We've tried everything. Explosives, advanced cutting tools, even heat. Nothing works. It's as if the door is resisting us." The commander's brow furrowed. He could sense the urgency in the team's tone, the worry creeping into their voices. What could be behind that door? And why had it been hidden for so long? "Let's take a closer look," Hayes said firmly. He gestured for the team to proceed. One of the soldiers, a burly man named Sergeant Jason Lee, approached the door carefully. As his hand touched the metal, something unexpected happened. The door seemed to respond. A faint hum echoed through the air, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated ever so slightly. The team gasped in unison. "What was that?" Dr. Carter whispered, her eyes wide in disbelief. "I don't know," Hayes answered, his pulse quickening. "But I think it's waking up." A soft click followed, and suddenly, the door began to slide open. It was as if something had been activated, something that had been dormant for far too long. The opening revealed a dark, narrow corridor stretching far beyond what their likes could see. The walls were made of the same smooth metallic material, and strange markings were carved into the surface. They glowed faintly, pulsing with a light that seemed to match the hum they had just heard. Whatever this place was, it was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. "We need to get inside," Hayes ordered, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. The team hesitated for a moment, exchanging uncertain glances, but they knew there was no turning back now. They had come this far. It was time to uncover the truth. The team advanced cautiously, stepping into the corridor. As they walked deeper, the air grew colder, and the silence became oppressive. It felt as though the very walls were watching them, judging their every move. At the end of the corridor, they reached a large chamber. A strange blue light filled the space, casting eerie shadows against the walls. In the center of the room was a massive circular platform, surrounded by strange technology and structures that looked like nothing from Earth. This is... Dr. Carter's voice trailed off as she stared at the center of the room. "This is alien technology. But it's different. It's ancient, far older than anything we've seen." Hayes stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen advanced weaponry and technology from the alien invaders, but this was something else entirely. The machines and structures here seemed so much more sophisticated, as if they were crafted by a civilization that existed before the aliens even came to Earth. "What is this place?" Hayes whispered to himself. Before anyone could answer, a soft, mechanical sound echoed from the far end of the room. The platform in the center began to hum with energy, and the lights intensified. It was as though the entire structure was awakening, just like the door had. Suddenly, a voice, low, mechanical, and distorted, filled the air. Warning, unauthorized access detected. Warning. The voice repeated, growing louder and more urgent with each passing second. Get back, Hayes shouted, instinctively stepping back, but it was too late. The room erupted with light, and the walls trembled as if the very foundations of the structure were shifting. Something was awakening beneath the ice, something that had been dormant for thousands of years. And now, humanity had unleashed it. The awakening. The chamber shuddered violently, and the lights flickered as the mechanical voice echoed in the air. Warning. Unauthorized access detected. Warning. Commander Hayes' mind raced as he instinctively motioned for his team to fall back. But they were too late. The room seemed to come alive, the strange blue light intensifying, as if some ancient power was stirring from its long, dormant slumber. Move, move, Hayes shouted, his voice firm but laced with panic. The walls groaned and creaked, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Every breath they took felt like a gust of icy wind stabbing at their lungs. Dr. Carter stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with shock. This can't be happening, she whispered, barely able to process what she was witnessing. As the platform at the center of the room hummed louder, a large mechanical panel on one of the walls shifted. It slowly slid open, revealing a massive rotating device embedded deep within the structure. The device was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It glowed with a pulsating energy, its movements seemingly calculated and deliberate, as if it were alive. The device, it's activating, Dr. Carter managed to say, her voice trembling with awe and fear. Hayes felt a chill crawl up his spine. Activating. What was this machine, and why had it been hidden for so long? What kind of force had been waiting beneath the ice? These were questions that needed answers, and fast. Get ready, Hayes ordered, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his mind. The team braced themselves as the mechanical device began to spin faster, the hum of energy filling the room. Without warning, the device emitted a burst of bright blue light. It shot through the chamber like a lightning strike, and for a brief moment, everything went silent. The light was blinding, and for a split second, Hayes thought they were all going to be engulfed by it. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light faded. The room was left in an eerie stillness, the air heavy with tension. The only sound was the soft, distant hum of the machinery. What just happened? Sergeant Lee asked, his voice shaky. What was that? Hayes stepped forward cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. The chamber had returned to its former state, cold, dark, and silent, but something was different. He could feel it. There was a change in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. That was no ordinary technology, Hayes said quietly, his eyes fixed on the now dormant machine. Whatever it was, it's connected to something far greater than us, and we've just woken it up. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her face pale. That burst, it wasn't just energy. It felt like it was communicating with something outside this place. The realization hit them all at once. This structure, this device, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something far more dangerous. And now that it had been awakened, the world might never be the same again. We need to leave, Hayes said urgently. Get the team back to the base. We need to report this immediately. As the team retreated, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. The deep hum that had filled the chamber earlier still lingered in the air, as if the structure was aware of their presence. It was almost as if something, or someone, was watching them. When they finally reached the surface, the Arctic sky seemed darker than it had been when they arrived. Hayes couldn't help but glance over his shoulder toward the excavation site. The metal door was still wide open, and the strange blue light was still visible from the depths of the structure. Whatever they had unleashed, it was clear that it wasn't done yet. Back at the base, the team quickly set up a secure communication link to military command. Hayes's mind was racing, but he knew that there was no time to waste. The discovery they had just made was far beyond anything they could have imagined. "What now, Commander?" Sergeant Lee asked as they stood around the briefing table, their faces grim. "We wait," Hayes replied, his voice low. "We wait, and we prepare, because whatever that thing was, whatever it's doing, it's just the beginning." As Hayes sat down, his thoughts began to turn over the possibilities. Was this some sort of weapon, or perhaps a message from a long-lost civilization? One thing was certain: they had only scratched the surface. Whatever was hidden beneath the ice, whatever power that device held, it wasn't meant for humanity to find. And now, there was no going back. The silent threat. Commander Hayes sat at his desk, the lights of the command center flickering as they monitored the strange readings coming from the Arctic site. His mind couldn't stop racing. Every minute since the discovery had felt like an eternity. The strange device had been dormant for thousands of years, and now it was awake. But what did that mean for humanity? What kind of power had they unleashed? The command center was filled with a quiet urgency. Scientists, military personnel, and analysts were all working nonstop, trying to decipher the data they had gathered. On one of the monitors, an image of the structure flickered, showing the metallic door still wide open, as if inviting something to emerge. "Sir, we've picked up something." Lieutenant Jessica Harper's voice broke the silence. Hayes looked up sharply, his heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" Hayes asked, already standing up. The tension in his voice was clear. Harper didn't take her eyes off the screen. "It's faint, almost like a signal. We've been tracking it since the device activated. It's coming from the structure itself. A signal. From that thing." Hayes' voice was filled with disbelief. They had only been able to study the structure for a short time, but the signals they were receiving now were like nothing they had encountered before. "Yes, sir," Harper continued. "It's unlike any communication we've intercepted. We're still trying to decipher it, but the frequency is. It's not human. It's not even alien. It's something entirely different." Hayes felt a knot form in his stomach. They were no longer dealing with an ancient weapon or artifact. They were dealing with something that didn't belong to this world. Maybe not even to this galaxy. Dr. Carter, who had arrived moments before, stepped forward. "The structure's reaction to our presence, it feels intentional. The signal it's sending is directed. It's trying to make contact with something. Something outside this planet." Hayes asked, though he already knew the answer. "I can't say for sure," Carter replied, her face drawn in worry. "But the pattern, the energy it's sending, it's not random. It's too precise." The room fell silent as everyone processed the weight of the situation. They had awakened something. And now it seemed, whatever it was trying to reach out. "What does it want?" Hayes muttered under his breath. That was the real question. What could this ancient, alien-like machine want with humanity? And why now? After everything they had just been through with the alien war, was Earth truly safe? Suddenly, a soft beeping sound came from one of the monitors. Harper's eyes widened as the beeping grew louder. "Sir, the signal, it's changing. It's getting stronger." Before anyone could react, the entire room plunged into darkness. The lights flickered once, then went out completely, leaving them in total blackness. The hum of the machinery that had been constant up until now ceased, and an eerie silence fell over the command center. "What's happening?" Lieutenant Harper asked, her voice laced with fear. Hayes stepped forward, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He could feel his pulse quicken. "It's the structure. The signal. It's not just coming from the Arctic anymore. It's here, on Earth." A low rumble echoed through the building, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. The entire base shook violently, sending a shockwave through the walls. The command center's monitors flickered back to life, but now, instead of static or data, they displayed an image of the structure, alive and pulsing with a blue glow that filled the screen. "We're not just receiving the signal," Dr. Carter whispered, her voice filled with dread. "We're being scanned. It's looking for something." Hayes turned, his mind racing. What could it want with them? It was as if the structure was studying them, analyzing their very presence. The entire base seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, as if it were alive. "We need to get to the surface," Hayes said quickly. "Now." The team moved quickly, navigating through the darkened hallways of the base. As they emerged into the cold air of the Arctic, they saw that the strange blue light from the structure now illuminated the sky above them. It wasn't just contained to the excavation site anymore. It had spread, casting an eerie glow over the surrounding area. But that wasn't the worst part. As they looked toward the horizon, they saw it, massive ships, dark and formless, descending from the sky. The blue glow from the structure seemed to be calling them. The ships, massive and silent, hovered above the earth, their presence undeniable. "Impossible," Dr. Carter breathed. "They're here. Whatever this signal is, it's bringing them." Hayes's heart sank as he watched the ships approach. The war with the aliens had ended, but a new threat had just appeared, one far more terrifying than anything they had faced before. The signal wasn't just a warning. It was a beacon. And they weren't the only ones who had been listening. The arrival, the cold wind cut through the Arctic landscape, biting at their skin as Commander Hayes and his team stood frozen in place, eyes glued to the sky. The massive ships hovered above them, their dark silhouettes blocking out the stars. A strange, almost otherworldly hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "What are they?" Sergeant Lee whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. His hand instinctively reached for his weapon, though it felt useless against the looming threat above them. Hayes' mind raced. He had seen many things in his time as a soldier, but nothing compared to what he was witnessing now. These ships weren't from any civilization they had encountered. They were different, ancient, and powerful, like something out of a nightmare. Dr. Carter was the first to break the silence. "These ships, her voice caught in her throat as she squinted up at the dark vessels. "They're not just hovering. They're scanning the planet." The blue light from the Arctic structure grew brighter, almost blinding as it pulsed in rhythm with the hum from the ships. Hayes could feel the vibrations in his bones. It was as though the entire world was holding its breath. He stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the ships. "We need to get back to the base. Now." The team quickly turned, heading toward the command center at a sprint. As they moved, the rumbling from above intensified. The ships were no longer just observing. They were preparing to descend. "They're landing," Dr. Carter said, almost to herself. This is impossible. There's no way we could have known they were coming." Hayes nodded grimly. They had awoken something far beyond their understanding. The device in the Arctic, that strange signal, it had been a beacon, a call to these ships. And now, they had come. Back at the command center, chaos erupted. Soldiers scrambled to secure the perimeter, while scientists and engineers tried to make sense of the situation. The entire base was on high alert, but Hayes knew they were vastly unprepared for what was to come. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Harper asked, her voice tinged with fear. Hayes stared at the monitors, where the ships were slowly descending toward the ground. Their engines hummed with an unsettling low frequency, sending ripples of energy through the atmosphere. The lights flickered again, and the temperature seemed to drop even further, as if the ships themselves were draining the warmth from the planet. "They're landing," Hayes said, his voice firm but betraying his concern. "Prepare for contact." Moments later, the ships touched down on the frozen tundra with a sound that reverberated through the very ground beneath their feet. The blue light from the structure intensified, now casting a haunting glow over the entire area. The base personnel, soldiers and civilians, stood in a tense silence, unsure of what to expect. Then, without warning, the ground in front of the ships began to shift. The ice cracked, and large metallic structures began to rise from the earth, emerging like forgotten titans from beneath the frozen surface. These structures were massive, towering above the base and the ships, covered in strange, pulsating symbols that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Dr. Carter's voice broke the silence again. What are these things? They're not human. They're not alien. They're something else entirely. Hayes could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. His entire military career had been preparing for combat, for alien encounters, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for these towering machines, these ancient beings that had remained dormant for centuries, now rising as if they had been waiting for something. Waiting for them. They're not here to negotiate, Hayes muttered. Whatever these things are, they're here for a reason, and we need to figure out what that reason is, fast. The massive metal structures continued to rise, and from within them, figures began to emerge. They were tall, their movements smooth but deliberate, like machines with a purpose far beyond what Hayes could understand. They were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were made of a strange, metallic substance, glinting in the eerie blue light. Yet everyone inside. Hayes barked. Now. The soldiers quickly ushered civilians into the base, but Hayes could sense the growing panic in the air. Whatever these beings were, they didn't belong here, and they weren't friendly. The hum from the ships intensified, and Hayes knew they had mere moments before the full force of this new threat descended upon them. He turned to Dr. Carter. What do we know about these things? Carter's eyes were wide with shock. Nothing. There's no record of this kind of technology. It's not possible. These structures, they don't even match anything we've seen before. It's like they were built by something beyond our understanding. As she spoke, one of the metallic figures stepped forward, its glowing eyes fixed on the team. It was tall, taller than any human, and its presence sent a chill through the air. Without saying a word, it extended a hand toward them, its fingers long and slender, yet powerful. The movement was fluid, but every step seemed deliberate, as if it were a machine with a singular purpose. Everyone, stay calm, Hayes commanded. But his voice was strained. It was clear to him now, this wasn't just a first contact situation. This was something much darker, much more dangerous. These beings, whatever they were, had been waiting for humanity to reach them. And now, they had arrived. The revelation. The eerie blue light from the ancient structure bathed the scene in an unnatural glow, casting long shadows over the metallic beings that now surrounded the command center. The tall figures stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans below, as though assessing them. The air was thick with tension, and the hum of the ships above only added to the ominous atmosphere. Commander Hayes, his hand resting on his sidearm, took a slow step forward. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the silence that had fallen over the frozen landscape. The massive figure in front of him extended its hand further, its long fingers sharp and precise. Hayes felt a chill sweep through him, but he held his ground. Stay alert, he whispered to his team. His voice was steady, though his mind raced. What did these beings want? Were they here to destroy humanity, or was there something else at play? Without warning, the figure spoke. The voice was mechanical, distorted by an unnatural resonance, but it was unmistakably clear. Humanity has awakened us. Hayes' blood ran cold. The voice was not what he expected. It wasn't a warning, nor a threat. It was a statement, an accusation. We have been dormant for eons. The figure continued, its voice now resonating in Hayes' mind, bypassing the ears and striking straight at his thoughts. Waiting, watching. The ground trembled slightly as the figure raised its other arm, and a holographic image flickered to life above it. The image was of Earth, no, of Earth's past. It was a history of the planet, one that Hayes had never seen. It was as though these beings had been watching the planet from the very beginning. Your war, the figure said, was not the first. It was simply the latest. Earth's history is rife with conflict, with destruction. But the war you fought, the war that ended with your victory, was different. It triggered something within us. Hayes' mind raced. Triggered something. What do you mean? The figure's glowing eyes blinked, and for a moment there was silence. Then the voice continued, now colder and more foreboding. You awakened the signal. The device you uncovered in the Arctic. It was not just a beacon. It was a key to our return. Return, Hayes echoed, his breath catching in his throat. You've been here before. The figure's head tilted slightly, as though acknowledging the truth of his words. We were the first. We came long before your civilization rose from the ashes of your world's endless wars. We seeded this planet with life, guided it from the shadows. But when you, humans, began to fight among yourselves, when you proved that you could destroy as easily as create, we left. We left, and we sealed the door. Hayes felt the weight of the revelation settle over him. Earth was no longer just the home of humanity. It was a place where ancient forces, far beyond human comprehension, had once walked. And those forces had been watching for centuries, waiting for humanity to prove it was worthy of their return. The figure's tone softened, almost as if it were pitying them. You fought for your survival. You defeated the alien invaders, yes, but you don't understand. You don't realize what you've unleashed. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear. What do you mean? What's coming? The figure's glowing eyes flickered with an unsettling intensity. You've called us back, but you've also called others. Your victory has not only awakened us, it has signaled to others in the stars. And they will come. The war you fought is nothing compared to what is coming. The ground shook again, this time with more force. The lights in the command center flickered, and the air grew colder. Hayes felt the weight of the figure's words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about the beings that had awakened. There was something else, something more dangerous, that was coming. You have opened the door to something far older than you can imagine, the figure continued. And now you must face the consequences of your actions. The universe is watching, and the next phase of your existence will be determined by how you respond. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The world held its breath, the tension thick enough to choke. Hayes knew that their entire understanding of the universe, of Earth's place in the grand scheme of things, had just been shattered. This was no longer just about survival. This was about humanity's role in a much larger, much more dangerous game. We will help you survive the coming storm, the figure said, its voice colder now, more authoritative. But the cost will be high. You will have to make a choice, one that will determine your future. Hayes looked around at his team, at the soldiers, the scientists, and the civilians who had gathered to witness this moment. They had no idea what was coming next. None of them did. We don't have much time, Hayes said, his voice steady despite the rising fear within him. Get everyone inside. Now. But as they turned to head back into the base, the ground beneath them began to rumble again. This time, it wasn't the ships. It wasn't the ancient machines. It was something else, something far more terrifying. In the distance, something moved. The sky above began to shimmer, and shapes began to materialize. Dark, massive, and terrifying, like shadows from another realm. They weren't from the ships. They weren't from the structure. They were something else entirely, something ancient. And they were coming. The last choice. The night was unnaturally silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Commander Hayes stood at the edge of the command center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The shapes that had appeared in the sky, dark and foreboding, continued to descend. The ground trembled beneath his feet as the hum of the ancient structures intensified. The very earth seemed to be holding its breath. Behind him, the team scrambled, preparing for whatever came next. But Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that their efforts might be in vain. The ancient beings had spoken of a choice that would determine humanity's future. But what was it? What could they possibly do in the face of this overwhelming force? He felt like a pawn on a board far larger than he could comprehend. Dr. Carter approached him, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Commander, we need to understand more about these beings. We need to know what they mean by this choice." Hayes turned to face her, his expression grim. "I know, but the time for understanding may be over. We're about to face something far beyond our knowledge." The air grew colder, and the shadows on the horizon began to take shape. Massive alien figures that seemed to distort the very atmosphere around them. The ground beneath their feet trembled with every movement they made. The humans had never seen such creatures, and for a moment, Hayes wondered if any of them would live to tell the tale. The ancient being that had spoken to them appeared once again in the midst of the gathering darkness, towering above the rest. It raised its hand, and the air around them seemed to distort as it spoke in its chilling mechanical voice. "The choice is yours," it said, its words echoing in their minds. "You have awakened the sleeping gods. You have called us to return. But others are coming, forces beyond your understanding. Your survival depends on how you respond. You must make the ultimate decision. Choose wisely, for there will be no second chances." Hayes took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. What is the choice? What do we have to do to survive? The ancient being's glowing eyes seemed to soften for a moment, though its voice remained cold. "You can fight. You can defend your world and try to push back the invaders that are coming. But be warned, this will drain your strength and the cost will be high. Or you can align yourself with us. You can join forces with the beings who have walked this earth before, and you will gain power beyond anything you can imagine." Hayes' mind raced. The idea of allying with the very beings who had watched over Earth, who had abandoned it in the past, was tempting, but something about it felt wrong. Was it worth the risk? Could they trust these ancient beings? Could they trust anyone after everything they had just learned? "What happens if we refuse?" Carter asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The being's response was chilling. "Refuse, and you will face the consequences. Those who come will show no mercy. Your kind will be wiped from existence. You will cease to be. But if you accept the alliance, if you fight alongside us, you will have a chance." The silence that followed was suffocating. Hayes turned to his team, his eyes scanning each face. They were all waiting for him to make the decision. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, crushing him with the realization that whatever choice he made could decide the fate of humanity. "We can't fight them alone," Carter said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "We've seen what they're capable of. If we don't accept the alliance, we're dead." But Hayes wasn't so sure. There was something too convenient about it all. These beings had waited for centuries to return, and now they were offering their power to humanity. Why now? Why them? What was the real price of this so-called alliance? "You don't trust them, do you?" Carter asked, reading his expression. "No," Hayes replied, his voice firm. "I don't, but we have no choice. We either fight alongside them, or we perish." The weight of his decision was unbearable. He knew that there would be no turning back once they accepted the alliance, but in the face of annihilation, what other choice did they have? As the massive alien shapes closed in, the shadows of an impossible future looming over them, Hayes turned to the ancient being, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "We accept your offer," he said, his words carrying the gravity of the decision. "But understand this, we will not be your pawns. We will fight on our terms." The being's glowing eyes flared with a light that seemed to shake the very atmosphere around them. "Your resolve is admirable. You will need it. Prepare yourselves, for the storm is coming." With that, the ancient beings began to move, and the massive shapes in the sky started to descend rapidly. The final battle for Earth was about to begin, and humanity had just made its choice.